You're tuned in to More Living with Jim Brogan, broadcast live from the Brogan Financial Studios at News Talk 98.7, where old-fashioned values, expert knowledge, and genuine understanding come together to give you the retirement straight talk you deserve. Jim's a former National Advisor of the Year recipient and a financial educator, and he's here today to talk about how you can live out the best years of your life. Jim and the Brogan Financial team have been helping retirees and pre-retirees across the Southeast for over 20 years in their pursuit of financial independence. You can reach them during the week at 865-862-6800. So sit back, relax, and get ready to learn, because More Living with Jim Brogan starts now.
Hello, East Tennessee, and welcome to More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. This is News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I've got a great show in store for you today. We're going to talk about what I consider to be the number one economic concern as we move forward over the next 12 months. You know, I'm probably more optimistic than pessimistic in terms of, are we going to have a soft landing with what the Fed has been doing with raising rates and trying to slow down the economy? But there are some concerns, and the greatest economic uncertainty I'm going to cover for you today and really dive into what does it mean for you and me, what does it mean as an investor. Then we're also going to talk about your retirement number. Can you retire for less than $1 million? Should you be looking at a number like that? And is Tennessee a good place to retire to in terms of cost of living? And finally, we will discuss the president's new proposal for how he wants to tax corporate America and the ultra-rich. Should you be concerned or should you care about a tax on the ultra-wealthy? We'll talk about that as well. So let's dive right in. In my view, the number one economic concern for the rest of 2024 and going into 2025 is what happens with inflation and interest rates, and especially inflation. Inflation has proven to be somewhat persistent, and it has led to some speculation that the Fed may not cut rates as much or as quickly as expected. So we had these tremendously fast increases in interest rates. We went from basically 0 to 5.25% on the Fed funds rate. And there's not much concern that the Fed will increase rates again. But the speculation coming into this year had been that the Fed would decrease rates maybe as many as 3 or 4 times this year. I was not as optimistic, and I've talked on this program about that I think, you know, anything happening in the first 6 months this year would be unexpected in my view. And now we're getting more and more of that type of chatter from economists and even from the Fed chairman, and why inflation has been persistent. The stubborn inflation in January has sparked worries that it might not be cooling down as hoped. And for you, this means the cost of living may remain high. That affects everything from grocery bills to energy costs. It can erode purchasing power. It makes it more expensive, as you know, to maintain your standard of living. And, you know, a rate cut could potentially relieve some pressure by lowering borrowing costs for consumers on things like mortgages and auto loans. But if the Fed decides to keep rates steady for longer, Americans face higher interest rates on loans and credit, and it makes borrowing more expensive. It makes borrowing more expensive for businesses that want to grow capital and expand. So we've got these competing elements of economic growth versus inflation pressure. The U.S. economy's resilience, growth has continued to outpace forecasts. You know, most thought we would have recession by now, and we have not. And it has created, the economic resilience has created sustained inflationary pressures. The resilience benefits the job market and overall economic health, but complicates the Fed's decisions on interest rates. And so, when we look at what's going on, if we look at what's gone on the last 5 years, we had the economic stimulus coming out of the pandemic. We had, even leading up to the pandemic, we had the economic stimulus from the Federal Reserve in two ways. We had the Federal Reserve keeping interest rates low, and we had the Federal Reserve printing money and increasing the money supply dramatically. So we had this huge surplus and stimulus, and then when the pandemic hit, we had all that stimulus from Congress and from Washington. And so you had all this money flush into the market, and then that led to inflation. And so then the Fed has raised interest rates in the hopes of causing a slowdown in economic activity. And the fourth phase of that is that typically the economy would slow down, would cause a mild recession, or just cause economic growth to just slow down to near to zero, which would not be a recession, and the Fed would get its soft landing. The problem is we haven't seen that pullback in the economic data. And so the Fed's got this quandary. Inflation has stayed up in the 3.2% range. And I know it doesn't feel like 3.2 because that 3.2% is on top of what was over 8.5% just in the last year or so. So prices have not come down, and we feel all that when we go to the grocery store. 3%, it's on top of all the other inflation. And corporate America has continued to be profitable because consumers are still spending money. So we haven't seen the slowdown in consumer spending. Part of that has been because of employment. Unemployment has remained at less than 4%. And up until last month, it was at 3.5%. And typically, the Fed does not lower interest rates if unemployment's under 4%. And we've never had a recession without unemployment going up about 0.5%. So, the expected slowdown in the economy with the slowdown in consumer spending has not happened. And that creates uncertainty around inflation and Federal Reserve policy. Now, here's how that can affect us all. Corporate America, corporate profitability has continued to be pretty strong. It was around 10% last year in 2023. And the investment community, the markets, expect corporate profitability to remain in the double-digit range, maybe around 11% for both this year and next year. So in other words, the markets are expecting corporate America to continue profitability. Well, there could be some frustration in the growth of corporate profitability if inflation persists. And that could then affect the markets because the markets are expecting corporate profitability to stay strong. But if interest rates stay higher and if we continue to see inflation, then it could start to decrease margins for corporations, and you could see some decline in corporate profitability. So this is where, we kind of have to be concerned about could persistent inflation lead to growth frustration in corporate America, where if they have a harder time growing their corporate earnings. That could lead to some turbulence in the stock market. Then we've got the presidential election coming up in the fall. That could lead to some turbulence in the stock market. We've got all the geopolitical uncertainty. All of that can cause economic turmoil. Now, we know that the stock market by nature is a volatile instrument. And so how should we be handling this economic environment, this investment environment, with our investments moving forward into really the last 3 quarters of 2024? So stay with us. We'll have more when we come back. This is More Living with Jim Brogan here at News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Welcome back to More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I'm Jim Brogan, your host. We're with you every Saturday, 9 to 10 a.m. and again from 3 to 4 p.m. You can catch all of our podcasts online first you can go to Spotify, you can go to your Apple podcast. You can also download our and stream our podcasts on my website. If you go to broganfinancial.com and click on radio, we'll have all the content there. Today we're talking about what I view as the number one economic concern right now, and that is persistent inflation leading to some growth frustration with U.S. companies. In other words, if U.S. companies cannot be as profitable as expected, that could cause economic uncertainty, could cause a slowdown in consumer spending, could cause a pullback in the stock market. So we have potential for turbulence. But here's the thing. We always have potential for market turbulence and volatility. If there's two things that I think are true and most predictable about the stock market, it's number one, that it is unpredictable, and number two, it is potentially volatile and can be turbulent at any time. However, market investments are the best way to beat inflation over time. At least they have been the single best investment to beat inflation over time historically has been the stock market. Now, it is true in certain economies, when inflation gets particularly high, there can be other asset classes that perform pretty well in an inflationary environment. Things like commodities. When we think commodities, gold and silver can be, is a subset of commodities. Anything that's priced in U.S. dollars when there is inflation can become a nice hedge for your portfolio. But the bottom line is, we never know which of those hedges are really going to pay off in the short term. And in the long term, the stock market has been the best way to beat inflation. And you need to be concerned when you retire about growth of income. Most people today are going to live 25 to 30 years in retirement. And you need to worry about what things are going to cost in 20 years. So it kind of creates this quandary because we know the stock market is very volatile in the short term, but it provides growth in the long term. So how do you manage that when you're approaching retirement or you're in retirement? And I think the most important thing is you should not be depending on market investments for short-term income. You don't want to be selling off an investment when it is substantially down to provide for income, because then you're spending that money. And then if you've spent it, you've compounded the loss, and it'll never ever come back. It's okay to sell something when it's down and reinvest it, but you never want to sell it when it's down and spend it. That's one of the real keys to wealth management, is don't spend an investment loss. So that means you have to have your short-term income needs met, not with market investments. Now, to clarify, if you're drawing dividends from stocks, that's okay to use as a part of your income plan, because you're not selling shares, you're simply spending the dividend. And I think that's okay to be part of your income plan. But if you're having to sell shares, and the most common area I see this is with mutual funds, is you're having to sell shares of mutual funds to generate liquidity for income needs. And we will have market downturns. And when the market is sharply down, that's when you've got to be able to wait those things out. So you got to have short-term income that you can pull from other sources, things like CDs, treasury bills, things that are protected, maybe some short-term bonds, things like that. Now, the second key is your risk investments. When you're closer to retirement or retired, you don't have the top time horizon as somebody who's in their 30s or 40s or even in their early 50s. You don't have 15 or 20 years in your time horizon for the market to go through its ups and downs. And so that means you could be hurt more by a significant downturn in the market. And I want to talk today about something I call the volatility tax. You can think of it as a tax on volatility in your portfolio. You know, the other way I refer to this is the cruel math of losses. You've heard me talk about that if you've listened to this show regularly. You know, if I have $100,000 and I lose 50%, now you've got $50,000. If you have $50,000 and you want to get to $100,000, you've got to make 100% on the $50,000. So in other words, to recover the 50% loss, you've got to make 100%. You know, if you lose 33%, you've got to make 50% just to get back to break even. Now, if you lose 20%, you only have to make 25% to get to break even. See, when the amount of the loss is decreased, the math isn't so cruel. So think about this like it's a tax on volatility in your portfolio. When we have deep market downturns, I would call that tail risk, where we have markets that are down 40%. And by the way, that's about an average bear market, is to be down about 40%. It just becomes painful if you lose 30 or 35% even, you know, for a pre-retiree or retiree. It's tough to overcome that in your income plan. You know, yeah, one is you need to have income you can draw from without having to sell off investments when they're down. But number two, you don't have 10, 15 years to recover from those losses. So it's like a tax on volatility. The more volatile your portfolio is, the more you get behind the eight ball because of that cruel math of losses. So I think that it is increasingly important to have a good plan for retirement, for income, for investments, for taxation, for fighting inflation, and all of these things. And that's where, you know, I think most people, their number one concern about retiring is whether they're financially stable enough and in a place where they can retire financially. There was a recent report that found heightened optimism among those who have chartered a financial roadmap, who've really thought about and put down on paper how much money will they need, how much income will they need, how are they going to draw their Social Security, what is their election, what about the primary earner, what about the secondary earner, how do spousal benefits play into that, what about potential widow benefits down the road when one spouse dies. The research sheds light on the urgent need for a roadmap, if you will, particularly among those nearing retirement. 2/5, almost 40%, so 38% of respondents over 50 said not having enough money is the most significant roadblock to their starting on retirement planning. Well, if you're worried you don't have enough money, that's exactly why you should be starting with your retirement planning. And by the way, this was a study that was done by T. Rowe Price. It also revealed substantial interest in planning tools. There are a lot of good planning tools online now, and also professional financial advice. With 40% of participants saying they're willing to use digital tools along with an advisor. So the T. Rowe Price study also unearthed a concerning gap in literacy for people around investment products, annuity products, all the different choices that are out there. Over half of the respondents in the survey that are on the cusp of retirement admitted to having either a poor or very poor understanding of these critical financial instruments. And that's where I think becoming more educated, using tools, there's a lot of digital online tools that you can use, also professional advice. How can you become a more educated consumer? One way is through our classes that we teach through the University of Tennessee and Pellissippi State Community College. Those classes are a great way to learn the basics and the fundamentals of retirement planning and what you need to be thinking about for the critical phase of life and the fact that you're not going to have earned income anymore. So, but then even working with a professional who is a fiduciary, who is required to act solely in your best interests, I think it's becoming increasingly important to work with people that are fiduciaries that minimize conflicts of interest and aren't interested in selling a product but are interested in helping you meet your goal. Now, I will tell you, my next class is at Pellissippi State. Actually, my next two classes are at Pellissippi State Community College through their community outreach. The next one is Tuesday, April the 9th. So here in just a couple of weeks, Income Planning for Retirement. And it is a one-night class on April the 9th, 6:30 p.m. It's 2 hours. I'll teach how to draw Social Security benefits, how to protect your income against inflation, how to structure income in retirement, how to transition from that savings and accumulation phase into the retirement, the income distribution phase, and how to deal with the additional pressure that puts on your nest egg. And how do you create reliable income in retirement to ensure you aren't withdrawing funds when markets are choppy or down? How do you plan for the volatility tax? How can you mitigate the impact of market volatility? You need growth. Inflation over the long haul in a 25-year retirement is probably one of your two biggest risks, along with market uncertainty. But inflation's right up there. So how do we mitigate the impact of market volatility and that volatility tax and that cruel math of losses? So Income Planning for Retirement is on April the 9th, Tuesday night. To find out more, you can call Pellissippi at 539-7167 or go to PellissippiRetirementPlanning.com. Again, that's PellissippiRetirementPlanning.com. And then I have a class in May, on May the 7th. It's a one-night class at Pellissippi, Hardin Valley, on tax planning in your retirement, specifically about reducing income taxes in retirement. Now, when we come back from our next break, I'm going to dive into this new proposal from the Biden administration where he wants to tax more tax on corporate America and the ultra-rich, the ultra-wealthy. Should we care about a tax on the ultra-wealthy? Why or why not? So stay with us. This is More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
This is More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. As you listen to News Talk 98.7 WOKI. President Biden tells America this week that he wants to tax the ultra-rich. In a significant policy announcement, President Biden expressed his intention to implement tax reforms targeting multinational corporations and the ultra-rich, alongside measures aimed at supporting middle-class Americans. How should we care about this? Should we care about more taxes on multinational corporations and more taxes on the ultra-rich? So on corporate America, Biden is proposing raising the minimum tax for multinational corporations to 21% and increasing the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%. Now, the move is intended to make it harder for larger companies to avoid taxes, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry. The higher taxes, though, could lead to significant changes in corporate finance strategies and could impact their investment and expansion plans. An increase in the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%, that's a 33% increase in the tax rate. And that reduces corporate profitability. That could potentially lead to more increases in prices. It could be an inflationary move. It also could lead to more layoffs because the corporate tax rate goes up. So corporate tax rates absolutely can affect you and me and other American consumers in East Tennessee. The other thing that Biden is aiming for is to raise the tax on corporate stock buybacks from 1% to 4%. And it's designed to encourage companies to allocate more of their revenue towards employee salaries and productivity improvements rather than returning value to shareholders through buybacks. Now, we could debate this, but, probably the top two stakeholders for a U.S. corporation is going to be its stock owners and its employees, right? And then, of course, you got the consumers. So a corporation has to be able to balance those two stakeholders, the employees and the stockholder. And, if you don't, as a company, if you don't take care of your employees, you're not going to have a good company. And eventually it's going to affect the stock buyer, the investor, the stock owner. So, I would argue that taking care of employees is a rudimentary or a fundamental part of creating value for shareholders. But it has to be balanced because shareholders expect profitability. So those are all things to watch, but what about taxing the ultra-wealthy, the ultra-rich? So the proposal from President Biden includes imposing a minimum income tax of 25% on billionaires. So it aims to ensure that the wealthiest individuals contribute their fair share to the tax system. And you may say, well, Jim, how are they not paying 25%? The highest tax rate is 37% for ordinary income. Well, our tax code provides incentives for investment. And most notably would be long-term capital gains. Long-term capital gains, when I buy a stock or a piece of property or a mutual fund or whatever it is, and I hold it for more than 1 year, so 1 year and 1 day, I get preferential tax treatment because long-term capital gains rates are much lower for most taxpayers than ordinary income. So if I'm in a 24% tax bracket, my tax rate for long-term capital gains is going to be more than likely 15%. If you're in a 37% income tax bracket, think of a billionaire, their tax rate for long-term capital gains is 23.8%. So ultra wealthy are good at structuring things in a way where the bulk of their income comes to them as a long-term capital gain rather than ordinary income. So that's why you see, well, why wouldn't a billionaire be paying a 25% income tax? Well, because of the way they structure income. So there's two lessons there. One is, why shouldn't you be using those types of strategies in your own investment planning and income planning for retirement? I talk a lot, and we talk a lot at Brogan Financial about how to take advantage of long-term capital gains tax rates. If you're going to be drawing income, would you rather be taxed ordinary income or long-term capital gain? And we have many clients that are able to take advantage of the 0% long-term capital gains tax rate. If your total income prior to your deductions. If you're a married couple and your income is less than $120,000 as joint filer, if you're over 65 years old, any portion of that that's a long-term capital gain is taxed at 0%. And then if you get over that, it's 15% instead of the 22% you pay for ordinary income. So if the ultra wealthy are doing that, why shouldn't you be doing that? And the answer is you can. Now, you're not going to create some of the corporate and LLC and business structure strategies of an ultra wealthy, but you can absolutely take advantage of the investment preferential treatment on long-term capital gains. So that's number one. Number two, though, is should we care about an additional tax on the ultra wealthy? We've heard this in several areas. One has been, as I just said, a minimum income tax on billionaires. Well, number one, how do we define a billionaire? That could become problematic. But then there's been discussion of things like removing the long-term capital gain incentive for people that make over $1 million a year. We've also heard talk about a wealth tax. If you're more than $50 million, you could be subject to a wealth tax every year on anything over the $50 million. There have now been also proposals discussed that if you have too much money built up in your 401k or other retirement account, 403b type account, that once it gets over a certain amount, you have to take out 50% of what you're over that amount and pay the tax on it. And it's like a $12 million number. Now, I understand a lot of, not many people have more than $12 million in their retirement accounts. Not many people make more than $1 million a year. Not many people are worth $50 million plus in net worth. So should you care about these kinds of things? I think the answer is yes. And the reason why is because we open up Pandora's box. It is a slippery slope. When the income tax was implemented that we have today, the baseline of our current income tax system was implemented in 1914. And in 1914, when we implemented that income tax, you didn't have to pay any income tax if you made less than $3,000. Well, I got to tell you, in 1914, there weren't many people that made more than $3,000 a year in 1914. And even if you did, then anything over the $3,000 was only taxed at a 1% tax rate. And it was a marginal system just like it is now. So as you made more income, you started creeping into new brackets. The highest income tax bracket in 1914 was 7%, and that 7% was on income over $500,000. Well, who made $500,000 in 1914? I mean, the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers, right? So in 1914, not too many people were probably affected by the income tax rate. Oh, it doesn't affect me. I'm not worried about it. Just like some of these proposals today. But then where does that lead? If we take a group of taxpayers, let's say that make more than $1 million a year, we take a group of taxpayers and we say, you're now not eligible for the benefits in the tax code that other Americans are eligible for. At what point does that start to drip down into upper middle income America and then eventually to middle America? It's a slippery slope. I think it was Roy Rogers said nothing is more permanent. No, it was Milton Friedman. Nothing is more permanent than a temporary government program. And it's true. We know that. So once you open up Pandora's box, where does that lead? So we should all be paying attention closely. Anytime you take a group of taxpayers and say you're not eligible for the same benefits as other taxpayers, that can be very dangerous. That's different to me than saying if you could be subject to a higher tax rate. Income over a certain amount. But see, here's the thing about the current tax code. The first $100,000 of taxable income, let's say you're a joint filer. The first $100,000 of taxable ordinary income, you, me, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, we all pay the same amount of income tax on that first $100,000. So see, the ultra wealthy, that first $100,000 is taxed the same to them too. It's just that they get up over into the maximum 37% tax bracket and pay 37% tax on a lot of their income. But that first $100,000 is taxed the same. So again, when you start saying, here's a tax incentive that this group of taxpayers is not eligible for, that can be very, very dangerous. And so we need to be thinking about these kinds of things. And I think we do need to be worried about taxation on corporate America, because that can ultimately affect employment, unemployment. It can affect corporate profitability, which can affect increase in prices, which can be inflationary, which can affect consumer spending. So what is the effect downstream? So it is important to be aware of what's going on. Now, we're going to have a debate as we head into the summer and fall, as President Biden prepares for a campaign against Donald Trump. And they have very contrasting tax philosophies. And those are likely to become central themes in the political discourse. And the proposed changes could have a wide range of implications for the U.S. economy, for corporate behavior, and the financial well-being of American citizens across different income tax brackets. So you as a consumer are going to have an opportunity to weigh in on how you feel about these kinds of things. And I think it's going to be very, very important that we are as engaged as possible in the process as we kind of look forward to the fall of 2024. Now, we're going to get to our last break, and when we come back, can you retire for less than $1 million? And you hear people talk about your retirement. What is your retirement number? What's a number you need to be able to retire? Is that a legitimate thing, or is that a fallacy? Stay with us, and we'll cover my thoughts on that as you listen to More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Welcome back to More Living. Thanks for tuning in this week. I'm your host, Jim Brogan. This is News Talk 98.7 WOKI. My upcoming classes, which is a great way to get educated so you can make informed and prudent decisions that can impact the quality of your life. As I mentioned earlier in the show, having a plan is one of the most critical ingredients to being successful in retirement and to being able to retire with confidence. Do you have enough money to retire? The best way to find out all of our upcoming classes through the local universities, both the University of Tennessee and Pellissippi State, is at my website, broganfinancial.com. If you go to broganfinancial.com and click on classes, you'll see I have a one-night class on Tuesday, April the 9th, Income Planning for Retirement at Pellissippi State, a 2-hour class specifically about the challenges of really, in my view, the most overlooked area in retirement planning, which is how do you structure income? How do you generate income? How much income can you pull from? How do you reduce tax on income? And how do you elect your Social Security? Again, that's Tuesday, April the 9th. Then I've got a tax planning specific class on May the 7th. Both of those are Pellissippi State, Hardin Valley. Again, go to broganfinancial.com and click on radio. Now, how much do you need to retire? Can you retire for less than $1 million? There was an interesting article recently in USA Today, and the article highlights the financial challenge of retirement in the United States, and it suggests that $1 million may be the new benchmark for a comfortable retirement. Is that true? What is your retirement number? Is that even a thing? And is that answer different in Tennessee than it is in New Jersey? Well, of course we know the answer is yes to that, right? This particular article highlighted 16 states that are becoming more and more difficult to retire in because of their cost of living. Tennessee is not on that list. Florida, the top two states that people 65 and up are retiring to are Florida and South Carolina. I know Tennessee and Georgia are up there in the top 10, but Florida and South Carolina are the top two. And Florida and South Carolina, neither one is on the list of the 16 highest cost of living states. Now, I imagine Florida is absolutely a higher cost of living than Tennessee or South Carolina. But that's what the data says. And let's talk about this, what I consider a fallacy of your retirement number. What is the number everybody needs to retire? Well, it's so different for every person. I mean, most surveys indicate Americans believe they need between 1.1 million and a staggering 4.3 million. And that staggering difference in shift suggests a growing concern about the adequacy of retirement savings in the face of inflation. So the varied requirements underscore the importance of personalized financial planning. And then how long do you need your money to last in retirement? What are your other income sources? You know, for someone that retires with a pension plan from Oak Ridge DOE, from one of the lab DOE contractors, you know, you have an extra income through a pension that a taxpayer without that pension does not have, a retiree that does not have. So someone with a pension plan is probably not going to need as big of a nest egg as somebody without a pension plan. Likewise, what is your Social Security strategy? And how much is that Social Security income? Do you have other income sources? Do you have rental income properties? What is your net rent? Do you have debt on that rental? And how does that affect your cash flow? All of these things are critically important. And then, of course, finally, what's your standard of living? How much money do you need in order to retire comfortably? How much income do you need? So, see, I've talked to people who have less than $1 million in investments that are very comfortable in their retirement because of all the other factors that go into play in terms of their other income sources and their retirement income needs. I know other people who have more than $2 million who are not as comfortable in their retirement or maybe need to work a few more years before they retire. So it comes back to the critical need of financial planning. You know, retirement needs are different based on your lifestyle, your health needs, your debts, other personal factors, and your other income sources. So it makes it crucial for you to tailor your saving strategy and your income plan to your unique considerations. Now, the standard estimate of a 25-year retirement may not apply to everyone. More and more people want to retire earlier. And if you retire earlier, you're going to have to probably plan for more than 25 years of retirement income. Likewise, more and more people are finding they cannot retire when they want to, and they have to work longer. You know, if you work till you're 70, you may not need retirement income for 30 years. You might need it for 20 to 25 years. So the duration of the need for retirement income also becomes critically important. So for U.S. residents, you know, these insights emphasize the need for careful retirement planning. How can you create that takes into account your own personal goals, your expected expenses, and the potential need for a sizable nest egg to ensure comfort and security in later years. So what's your retirement number? Who knows? Do you need $1 million? Don't know without knowing all these other factors that come into play. Now, with inflation, certainly people are needing more and more money to be able to retire and generate income. But the reality is it's going to be different for everybody listening to this show, for everybody that attends any of my classes. That is a way you can equip yourself to make informed and prudent decisions. My next class is Tuesday, April the 9th at Pellissippi State Community College, Hardin Valley. You can go to broganfinancial.com and click on classes. You can also call Pellis, and you can download a syllabus, and you can click to register directly with Pellissippi State. That class is run by Pellissippi State. They administer it and take care of it. Thank you for tuning in this week. We've discussed your wealth because greater wealth provides for more living so you can live the best years of your life your way. Thank you to Wayne for engineering the show. Thank you to Jill for helping produce the show. Have a very, very blessed weekend as you've been listening to More Living with Jim Brogan, only on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
The views expressed by Jim Brogan and his guests are not that of Cumulus Media. Any discussion of financial, legal, and tax planning strategies is not intended to be individualized advice and is general in nature. Always consult with your advisor for advice specific to your needs. This program's content does not represent a recommendation of any particular security, strategy, or investment by Jim Brogan or Brogan Financial Incorporated.